Welcome to RPG Reanimators, a podcast for GMs where we dissect horror scenarios and offer our experiences and advice to reanimate them at the table. I'm Alex.
I'm Holly.
I'm Lex.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Scott.
So let's see what's on the slab. The subject of this procedure is Unland, written by Scott Dorward himself for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. In this scenario, players are drawn to a defunct amusement park, not knowing its sordid history. And while admission is free, getting back out might not be as easy. As with any dissection, we'll be discussing all the gross innards of the scenario, so from this point on there will be spoilers. So if you're interested in playing this scenario, please stop here and share this episode with your GM so they can listen and consider running this for your group. We'll also include links for where you can purchase a copy of this scenario for yourself in the show notes of this episode. Now with that out of the way, let's begin our dissection. So we know that people were lured into this theme park, but what's actually going on behind the GM screen?
So we have Funland, an amusement park that was closed 18 years ago after a scandal with a pedophile and child killer. Not a great look.
Ain't that just the way?
Yeah.
The PR employee who was tasked with covering all of that up, Ina Matthews, was driven insane by the lies she told to protect Funland. She began worshiping this phantom of truth, thinking of it as a way to strip away the lies that corrupt the world. So we have Funland, which is now Unland, which exists outside of the material world, and anyone who enters becomes trapped.
Ina or Ina? Not sure.
Ina.
Oh, okay. Ina is something of the gatekeeper of this new Silent Hill amusement park. And anyone that gets lured inside is, one way or another, pressured to relinquish their lies and guilt that may be plaguing them internally and positing it all behind a mirror. After this is done, they may feel better and like this is a genuinely good thing because Ina believes she's helping people and then can send them back out to lure more people into the amusement park. If you don't give up that part of yourself, well, you might have a bit of a bad time.
Scott, is this based on an actual amusement park you went to? Is this a one-to-one?
No. Well, yes and no. It's an amalgamation of all sorts of different things. When I was a kid, we used to go up to Scotland fairly regularly to visit my father's family, and we'd go to this regular annual fair in St Andrews called the Lammas Fair, which had all these traditional fairground rides and attractions there. And that's obviously a very different thing than an amusement park or a theme park, but I took a lot of those elements I remembered and stuck them in this theme park setting and used elements that I remembered from theme parks I visited while living in the US and just generally random fairground stuff. And it's the kind of thing that no real place would be like because there are so many aspects of it that are just wrong, like the roller coaster going around the outside. I mean, who the hell would design an actual amusement park like that? But I wanted to create something that just felt off, where everything was a bit weird, a bit wrong, and it just felt like a combination of elements that didn't necessarily belong together. And I hope that just added to the general uncanniness.
I think it's really effective. I can't speak for the rest of the world, right? But it feels like abandoned, rundown theme park is a bit of a universal American experience. I know my hometown had one, and I feel like lots of other people's hometowns have one. So it's like relatable, but it's still a vibe of like really creepy, even just as they exist today. So taking that theme is really, I think it's really great. I think it's very clever.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think that the scenario has great vibes for hitting those very solid horror staples because in the same way that we may know how people may go into a mummy's tomb to try to plunder things, we can immediately draw on that contextual information to help with roleplay. We all know that creepy amusement park with like clowns and things. And so players have a lot to draw on and create as well.
And I think it's because it's so archetypal, right? It's ingrained in the social consciousness of this is what you're imagining to be a creepy amusement park, and like everyone's got that idea of it, which is why it's so relatable. But I want to talk about how the PCs are brought in. Like, how'd they even get here in this circumstance?
Typically they get lured in, right? It's Unland has been closed for years at this point, almost 20. And there's going to need to be some kind of motivating factor for them to visit in the first place. And I think, Scott, you do a good job of laying out some really easy hooks just to get people involved.
Yeah, the whole trick is just finding some pretext to get this group in there. And yeah, like you said, I put a few in there. But when I ended up running this as a crossover for How We Roll and Ain't Slayed Nobody a while back, they decided they wanted to go for YouTubers doing a parkour video. And yeah, but even then, it wasn't their idea to go to Unland to do it, that they'd been posting on message boards or on Reddit or something like that, and some unknown party had just thrown in hints that, oh, yeah, you should go here.
Yeah, I love that. I have in my notes, feels like good potential for urban explorers or paranormal investigators or just in general obnoxious YouTubers. Yeah.
I mean, the meat and potatoes is in the amusement park, so just get the PCs there, just start the scenario.
You say that, but when I ran it for How We Roll and Ain't Slayed Nobody, I started them out on the private road up to the car park outside Unland, and it still took them an entire session to get from the car inside the amusement park.
Yeah. So let's describe some key locations in the text. We already went through Mr. Fun's Big Twister, which is that roller coaster that goes all around the perimeter of the amusement park. And I want to give my praises because it's multifaceted. Mechanically, it acts as a barrier for the PCs. It isolates the player characters. Isolation is such a big component of horror. And it also makes for a tighter scenario. So like they don't just run off to go to the library or into a research archive, right? The scenario's entirely in this amusement park.
Yeah, I like that. And there's also a bit of a potential trap to be had inside of Mr. Fun's Big Twister alert a little bit. I think that's clever too, although there are a lot of warnings posted.
Yeah, I liked how the scenario is written, Alex, kind of like you were saying, that there is this mist and fog that is shrouding all of it, which first off, chef's kiss, great atmosphere to lean into, but also you get into that aspect of losing direction and repeating yourself. I think of the podcast The White Vault, where they're trying to follow compass north. And as soon as they lose sight of the bunker, they are walking back to the bunker again. So you can get that looping to prevent some trying to escape. But if they're really bound and determined, they can try to climb through the roller coaster, but may not like what they find inside. Scott, where did you get the inspiration for the eyes and the marionettes and things between the struts of the coaster?
Oh, now this is complicated because Unland started out as a very different scenario than what got published. Because what I originally wrote for the book, we ended up not being able to use because of licensing problems. And instead of it involving marionettes and the Phantom of Truth and so on, it was all based on Ramsey Campbell's creation Daeloth from his story The Render of the Veils. And this is a god that basically strips away the artifice of the world and shows you the terrible reality that's underneath. And there's all sorts of imagery in that story. There is this icon of Daeloth in the story that is this massive, these sort of plastic struts, these fleshy plastic struts that have this mist between them. And if you look inside, there are eyes staring back at you. And so basically I just took that image and turned it into the basis of this roller coaster. And the original version, there weren't marionettes. It was these eyes. If you look inside and stare for long enough, there are all these sort of floating inhuman eyes of different sizes and shapes and staring back at you.
Fun.
And the mist aspect, yeah, that again came out of the description of the story, but it was that writ large. It was sort of what happens if you take this small icon that's there in the story and turn it into an entire theme park.
Hmm.
Now, Scott, that brings up the question: have you ever ran a version of Unland where you did go with Dayloth?
That's the only version I've run. I've
Oh,
never
okay.
actually run the version with the Phantom of Truth.
Ah.
That was, I mean, literally a last minute change because we'd gone into the project thinking that we had the rights to do that, and it wasn't until it went for approval with Chaosium that they pointed out that no, we couldn't do that. And so it was actually the editor of the collection, Carton Proctor, who went in and retrofitted all those elements. And so yeah, I've never actually run it like that.
Hmm.
Well, now I have to go watch your run of it, Scott, because I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, hopefully we can get into a lot of that more in reanimation. That way, this is going to be an entirely different way that you can steer this whole scenario. And speaking
yeah.
of steering, I want to ask about two of the other locations described in the text that, as a filthy American, I had no idea. There is the Giddy Giggler, which, what is a waltzer? I have to ask.
Yeah, I unapologetically used all the British names for things in this because it was
for
a
you.
British publisher and the scenario was set in the UK. And so, I mean, if I'd had more than 3,000 words to play with, I might have put translations in there for Americans, but there wasn't space. And so a waltzer, I mean, the closest I think you get in the US, if I'm not mistaken, is a tilt-a-whirl. A similar kind of thing.
Ah.
And so
Oh.
So it's like a big sort of lazy Susan type thing, except one that undulates, goes up and down, and you have individual booths or cups within there with seats that spin on their own axes. And you know what happens is you get some fairground attendant, usually a young man, who maniacally jumps between these cups and spins them manually as they're going around. And yeah, so it's an assault on the senses. You're being spun in so many different ways at the same time that by the time you come off, if you're not nauseated, you're probably not human.
That sounds just dreadful enough to be at a fair.
Vomit-inducing.
And the other one are the Dodgems, which is where players can meet a decidedly unfriendly NPC, Barry Walsh. But are Dodgems, is that like bumper cars? I wasn't clear on that one.
Yes. Yeah, exactly the same as bumper cars.
Ah, okay.
Look, Scott's just here to bring a little culture to the rest of us.
I feel more cultured already.
Yes, they're so called because you're supposed to dodge them.
We're supposed to drive directly into them. I think this is getting into like UK versus American traffic.
Cultural
no,
differences.
No, we do the same thing. I think they're called that ironically.
Any other key attractions in Funland?
There were some former attractions. I personally really liked the imagery related to the collapsed merry-go-round, as, you know, we're expecting to see some parts of the park in disrepair, but this one felt like it was deliberately trashed and destroyed by people that were inside, as not only is it collapsed, but all of the animals' eyes are crossed out. You see that as a recurring element in here that gave me some fun ideas to try and add some more things to it. Oh, I see fingers going up. What do we got?
The eyes being scratched out was very much a reference to the whole Dayloth thing, with people having looked in, seen those eyes, and they didn't want to see any more eyes, so they would scratch them out. But also an element of the people who were perhaps having to face looking at truths they didn't want to, just not being able to take eye imagery and scratching those out. The other thing that I do with all these rides is just, point out that people have been living this park, trapped here, as we'll get to, for some time, and they've been, not just defacing them, but they've been sabotaging them in other ways. They've been using the booths in the Giddy Giggler as toilets, and so everything about this is foul. Everything is repellent.
I would even say it brings a post-apocalyptic vibe where
Mm.
things are just being used for survival.
And sometimes things are being used for the opposite of survival, as players may find whenever they go to visit the Chaeroplanes, which is basically the swing that you can sit in and it'll spin you around going wider and wider. In this case, there is a friendly NPC, Sophia Ali, who is hanging around waiting for the investigators to come by, kicking limply at the end of a chain, unable to die in Funland. I think there's like a people are dying to get out of here joke somewhere in there,
Oh,
but I'm not sure.
Absolutely foul, Lex, foul.
I mean, it's the safest park in the world, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody can die. It is
Can't die.
impossible to
Yeah.
die here.
Or even get hurt.
Everyone should go, really. It's,
Yes,
Mm.
but he comes out better.
So we have some other locations as well, two like pretty key locations. Mr. Fun's House of Hilarity with the Hall of Mirrors, clown centric, not
Clowns
very
everywhere.
fun. I know, I hate
Hate
it. Not very fun house that players can have a few, jump scares and spooks before they end up in the Hall of Mirrors. And the Hall of Mirrors is, I guess, a potential kind of climactic scene for players. There are remnants, as we mentioned before, trapped within these mirrors. And remnants are hostile manifestations of lies that are going to attempt to merge with investigators. Then I'd really like to dive into that a little bit later, because that's a super interesting baddie to fight. So, investigators can choose to create their own remnant here and have a way to leave the park. So there's one kind of potential climactic location. Nathan, you want to give us a rundown of the Tunnel of Love?
Oh, the Tunnel of Love is. I like that you said everything's degraded, because it's gross no matter how you get into it. Is the tunnel's all like backed up and sewagey, but that's where Ina's been hanging out with her kind of model, this Phantom of Truth shrine, which is another way you can get out, as if you can figure out how to deconstruct or destroy this particular shrine. But the more you look at it, the more insane you go, which I really liked. There's an escalating sanity cost to just being around this thing.
It's like being at a modern art museum. It's terrible.
Do not ponder the art.
Right.
Again, that's taken very much from the Ramsey Campbell story, in that, in the Rend Reveals, that icon of Daloth that these two idiot occultists are playing around with just starts growing and growing and growing. They when they find it initially, or start examining it initially, it is like this small, almost cardboard box size thing, and it just grows to the stage where they get lost inside it.
And so, Scott, I'm curious. We've mentioned Ina Matthews a couple of times, her general motivations, why she lost it, why she's here now. Is she also sort of derived from this story, or is she a creation of your own? What went into her?
She's a creation of my own, yeah. I was trying to think of what kind of person would be obsessed with not just an abstract notion of truth, but who would be driven enough to try to want to see people's lies stripped away from them, to force them to confront the terrible things that they lie to themselves and other people about. And in the case of Ina, it was very much that she saw herself as having been destroyed by it, and this is her penance. This is her way of trying to make right all the terrible things that she did personally. And I mean, personally, I see Ina as an utterly sympathetic character, and I always play her as an utterly sympathetic character. She is indirectly doing terrible things to people, but she is doing it because she genuinely wants to help them.
And she genuinely believes she's doing good.
Oh, yeah.
I fully agree. And I thought that she was such an interesting, quote unquote, villain that, like, no, it's understandable why she did this. She believes she is helping people. And we had a really great roleplay moment with our characters trying to own up to that pain and those lies as giving us room to grow. And you could see her psyche was just fragmented. She's just like, why would you do that? Because we can just be better. We can be happier without it. And it's just seeing how she was already broken in that way was kind of heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad that came across.
So let's talk about some more NPCs. So we have Barry and then Sophia, two opposite ends of the spectrum here. Like one hyper violent and the other one who is given up. So they're both stuck and also are able to be interacted with by the PCs. And then we've got the remnants, who are also other NPCs that can be used as the threat. They're pretty much the main like threat of the scenario, other than being just trapped in this unland area.
But they just want a hug.
I think Barry is, has the potential to be a threat as well. He's definitely lost it and is.
Oh, yeah.
But is anything a threat here if you can't if you can't just die?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Barry was decidedly a threat in our game. Yes, I would call him a threat coming at us with a sharpened pole.
Yeah, first interaction, a sharpened pole just went through a PC's neck, and everyone was like, "Oh."
And I think that Barry is a great mechanism in the scenario to just have a kind of rabid NPC to demonstrate the undying nature of Unland, where someone is likely going to get assaulted. And Alex, I think you ran it well, that like he just he Dennis Detwillered one of our PCs, and then they woke back up.
Yeah.
So it was a great moment of like, oh fuck. Yeah, great reveal there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that in Barry and Sophia both are used well too, because this isn't a traditional investigation scenario. We don't have like a trail of clues for the PCs to follow, and that's perfectly fine. I like the way this is written. But Barry and Sophia can act as a way to move players along and kind of point them at Ina Matthews and point them toward the tunnel of love, if necessary, if they don't stumble across that themselves.
Everything's a resource for the keeper. And speaking of just like events and timetables, are there any that we should be aware of for Unland?
I don't think there are any main driving timetables. I feel like players are going to be plenty motivated to try to get out of here ASAP. So there's not a big reason to sort of keep them under the clock at all. If they are taking their time or don't really seem to be threatened or bothered by it, then, it might be useful to have the unnatural nature of the park sort of eat away at their sand, that they are just going to kind of lose it the longer that they stay here, or maybe have the remnants more eager to break out of the mirrors and things. Like there's reasons that Barry keeps to himself, and Sophia was kind of trying to take a different way out, that they're not on the ground in the main park.
What you say about the mirrors, that's the big thing. That's the pressure that when I'm running this, I try to put in there. Because again, this is something, because there was this 3,000 word limit for the scenarios in Fear Sharp Little Needles, there's all sorts of stuff I just had to hint at or drop completely. But one of the things that I put in when I run this is that there are mirrors everywhere. That it's not just like the funhouse mirrors and the kind of mirrors you'd expect to see in the rides, but people, worshippers, people who've been transformed by their experience here, have brought mirrors in themselves. And there's mirrors propped up in unlikely places. They've broken the wing mirrors and rear view mirrors off cars, and they're dangling around on strings. And you just can't move without seeing a mirror somewhere, and all these strange things moving inside them. And so I try to put in as many opportunities for people to stumble into mirrors in the fog or when trying to flee Barry or something like that, because I want those mirrors to break and I want the remnants out there to speed things along.
That is really great, creepy imagery. Like just thinking of these broken off car rear view mirrors or just dangling like wind chimes all around the park between the struts of the coaster. I think that there could also be ways that you could hint at that before they even get in the park. Like there's all of these rusted out vehicles in front, but maybe there's lots of tire tracks going in and out and some broken mirrors are on the ground. Like someone who was changed by the park came in and they took all the mirrors out of their own house and were setting them up, maybe dropped one on the way in. And just note that none of the cars have rear view mirrors or anything on them, is a weird detail that'll make more sense later. in a very bad way.
Yeah, I'm kind of envisioning these people that leave the park after they've abandoned a remnant, and then they still have that like, well, I cut this one bad thing out. What if I cut more bad things? So they just keep like looking in mirrors, depositing this horrible portion of being like, I'll leave it at the park. The park's the dump. You set it there, and then it's out of sight, out of mind. So you just have these hollow people that have almost no memory going back and forth.
The trauma dump. Yeah.
Yeah, that sets my mind alight with like introduction ideas. Like maybe a PC group is investigating a death of a friend and they go to their house and it's just covered, all the walls covered in mirrors, and then that
Yeah.
traces back to Unland. Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, certainly when I've run this at conventions before with different hooks, I've had a similar thing, but where they've encountered someone who has a friend who has basically left a remnant behind but can't remember that he did so. He knows he left something important there, and he's absolutely terrified of mirrors, so he's gone around and he's covered up all the mirrors in his house. And he doesn't know why he's done it, but he just needs to because he doesn't want to see another fucking mirror in his life.
I like that. I think another idea that I'm having for a sort of epilogue is if someone gets, I guess, invaded by a remnant and has someone else's painful memories and lies forced into their own mind that they aren't able to shake, if they are still able to escape the park, say by destroying this icon of truth, then anytime that they look at themselves in a mirror later, they see this kind of misshapen other. It's always just right behind them or something.
Oh, I like that.
So they try to drive away and they see it sitting in the back seat.
Nice.
I love the theme of mirrors, right? There's so many like cultural values, superstitions, like beliefs about mirrors and what they can do. I know that like multiple cultures, right? When a person has passed away, you cover all the mirrors in their house, that kind of thing, lest, they become trapped in this place. And so I like this idea. Like, I just like mirrors. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of my personal fears coming into this. When I was a kid, I used to have recurring nightmares about looking in the mirror and just seeing something behind me. And that was just what I wanted to bring into this. The idea of mirrors or paintings showing things that they're not supposed to just terrified me so much as a kid that, that's where all that came from.
Right. And I think this is a great time to just discuss the themes of the scenario that we take away. So, what's the beating heart of the scenario?
I feel like part of it's the theme of the abandoned theme park, right? That setting and the creepy factor of it all. I feel like that's part of it, right?
Yeah, I would definitely say vibes are some of the peak elements of this scenario that are so great to bring in. Like Holly was saying, absolutely emphasizing the creepy amusement park because it is such a core horror staple that players can draw from and really lean into with the creepy atmospheres and things. I also think being able to call on other horror staples like the creepy clown stuff. I hate it. So yes, it's going in there. These grasping, shifting shapes in the mirror, Holly, again, like you said, like that's so classic. And it's something that any player will be able to go, oh, I don't like that. I hope that's not in there. You bet your boots it is now. And then marionettes, if you really want to include them, just for some more weirdness. Have them posed around the park in the mist so they think there may be more people in the park. But
mannequins and marionettes, man, I hate them. I don't know
love
why.
it. Love
Probably
to hate
because of our last game of Impossible Landscapes, Lex. But that's a story for another day.
it.
I think the other really key like theme of this is lies and secrets, the lies we tell others, the lies we tell ourselves, and the penance aspect of it.
And redemption even in
Mhm.
whatever form. I've noticed there's like a lot of themes with perception, the fog coming in, obscuring that, eyes being scrawled out, things being clear once you have a remnant just deposited into a mirror. This scenario really shines with customized player characters and fine-tuned. Like
Absolutely agree. I think being able to have pre-generated player characters that have shared secrets and things between them that they may be trying to hide or trying to forget and move on with their lives just by burying it is such a crucial element for like a satisfying game, that they have something they really don't want to confront, and they are going to be forced to confront it through role play, for better or worse. So it was a very novel experience as a player that I deeply enjoyed. I also, kind of hearkening to the vibe notes, this scenario is basically a DLC for Silent Hill 2. I absolutely loved the atmosphere and the setting, talking about confronting these moral weaknesses and lies and things. I played Silent Hill 2 before playing this, and yeah, my mind was there. I had the soundtrack going in my head when Alex was describing this great roller coaster looming above us. You get that creaking metal in the mist, sounds and things. It's so good.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioning Silent Hill, because you're not the first person to do so, but that was not an influence on this at all, because I've not really played the Silent Hill games. I don't tend to play horror video games because they scare me too much. I'm not that familiar with Silent Hill, but so any similarities, I think, are entirely parallel development.
Yeah, in the third Silent Hill, there's a amusement park, and there's like a dream sequence. It's super cool. There's like one of the series mascots, which is just like someone in a giant bunny costume, a pink bunny costume that's just been bloodied. So yeah,
Nice.
would highly recommend.
Yeah, I definitely recommend too, if you aren't much fan of playing the Silent Hill games, because horror games are like uniquely tense to try and go through. There's a lot of really good, I think that they call them cinematic playthroughs, where someone is playing through Silent Hill 2 without commentary, without like all the reactions. So you're just seeing what all is in the game. So it's a really great way to get those atmospheric notes down.
I'll give that a try.
And I think part of the reason why a bunch of us think Silent Hill too, because the themes of Silent Hill are that these people are kind of trapped in this purgatory-like space because of, basically their sins, that they're bad people that have done bad things, and they're stuck in this place as kind of like almost atonement. Yeah, so very interesting.
So I'd love to go over the general strengths and limitations of this scenario as written. So let's get started on that one.
I'll kick it off with strengths. Great vibes. We've said it before. Well done, Scott.
Chef's kiss. So good.
And in general, I just like a short and sweet scenario that just stands on its own and doesn't need a lot from the GM. Like, it's very well structured and laid out. There's a good map that's just an excellent reference for people to use. And yeah, I don't think that there's a lot. I don't think you need to fix anything. I think you can do things to like add to it and make it like a more, but I don't think there's really anything you need to fix. And so I think it's a great scenario.
I agree.
Yeah. And it's really clear too, the different locations that are there, but also you talked about Ina and Barry and whatnot as almost floaters that you can bring in when it's narratively right. You can tease Ina, maybe a woman in a business suit is watching you from afar and then walks away. So you don't immediately have to run into her, but she's there. Or if they're slowing down, you can, I think you suggest, find ways to break mirrors, find ways to insert bad things happening. It's super flexible.
If you can even get a player in the beginning before they realize the consequences to break a mirror out of fear, right? Like, you see something, it's reaching toward you, and then they go to break it, and it's like, oh, oops. Guess what?
Yeah.
I'm personally a fan of having a phone call and actually it going through and it being someone who knows of your past. That's so cool, because instead of removing something by just saying, oh, there's no signal, because that's just so easy to do. It subverts it, this use of technology, where you're turning that into a scare, an additional scare. And that's so much more creative, and it's creepier.
Instead of a dead end, it loops around into something harmful.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to hear an example of how that can work, Cuppy Cup, one of the players in the actual play that I ran with How We Rolled and Ain't Slayed Nobody, had a character who had worked at the amusement park as a teenager and was not complicit in what had gone on, but I think his guilty secret was that he could have saved one of the victims but didn't. He was too cowardly to do so, and so he started getting text messages from her on his phone and things like that. And every time he tried calling out for help, she'd answer.
Ooh.
And it ended up being a very creepy reflection of what what he did.
Oh, yeah.
I was very happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, the like mental hiding sort of thing. It's very very cult too, in that same way of like, oh, we're all terrible. I really like that, because then I find the players too kind of feel like we're horrible. We kind of deserve this a little bit. So they really lean into letting their characters feel the pain of being in this really not great location. It's not fun.
I agree. And I think that this is also one of the reasons that this scenario really shines with some good pre-generated characters. You can tell this is a point I'm going to bring up a few times, because it can be fun to roleplay shitty people.
Yes.
And that's not often a kind of character that I might make for a game. Like, I at least want to make someone who would be compelling and fun to roleplay, but like someone with a gambling disorder who framed another person to take the fall for him on a construction gig gone wrong is not something I really would have thought of to create my own character originally, but it can be really fun to lean into. I want to think I'm a good person by pushing all of this shittiness that I have done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also a strength of this too is you took death out of the equation and made it worse. Like, you have to lose a part of yourself to get out of here, and there is no option of like, well, I'll just, I'll find a gun and take myself out of here, and at least I'm done with it. No, you
Nope.
can't do that. You either
Unlucky.
yeah, you have to lose a part of yourself, or walk into the struts and take your good luck with that. Good luck.
Yeah, take your chances with
Yeah.
what's on the other side.
Yeah, I think on the whole, death is the least interesting outcome in any horror game.
That's what Matt
Threat
Sanderson
and-
says too.
Yep. That's it. I pull that quote that dying is the least interesting thing you can do.
Yeah, and so the threat of, for example, what happens to the poor woman on the chairplanes who tries to kill herself, and she's there for months and months, just hanging there, unable to die. That to me is so much worse than if she'd actually succeeded.
Yep.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because our talking just spurred an idea for why she would have done that and not just gone through with it. Because a part of me wonders, should there be some more people wandering around if you wanted to create additional NPCs? But I think that it might be very good for her backstory if she was here with her husband, and her husband let go part of himself into the mirror, and she saw that he was different, that he lost a part of himself. And so like she saw that evidence that this is wrong and refused to do it herself, but was also unable to actually escape. So like maybe she and her husband were drunk driving and like did a hit and run or something, and he just forgot it, but that's been something that she doesn't want to let go because she's been sober ever since, but is sort of unjustly trapped here and doesn't want to play Ina's game.
Yeah. For limitations, I would say it's just the side effect of it being in Fear's Sharp Little Needles, where there's no like pre-generated PCs. So that's a little more work that the keeper has to do.
Yeah, I think if you've got the right group of players, getting them to create their own characters and explaining to them that secrets and betrayals and so on are vitally important.
Yeah.
If you've got players who, particularly ones who've played together a lot and know each other fairly well, being able to create those characters who can spark off each other in negative ways without it spilling over into any out of character animosity, then setting up that kind of powder keg so that when the secrets start coming out, then I think that works absolutely perfectly. But it's not going to work for everyone.
Right.
And expanding on your point, Alex, that the main limitations with the scenario, I think, are just attributable to the very short word count that you had available, Scott. Because I realize that as a GM, there's not really any information about the office space and the whole issue with the pedophile employee and like the whole reason for the shutdown. That context isn't really there. And so GMs will really want to think that up before jumping into it. Otherwise, you're going to have to pull something out of a hat. And so I'm really curious sort of what you had beyond the page there. I have other thoughts for reanimation, but just getting your input now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for a start, with the whole setup with the pedophile employee, I mean, that was very much me riffing on a lot of the scandals that were in the British press at the time that I was writing it. And I would wholeheartedly recommend GMs write their own backstory or come up with their own backstory as to whatever scandal was going on at Unland, or Funland rather, because for a start, that is a hook, or that is a horrible backstory for the park, isn't necessarily going to work for every player, and some people may really want to avoid that as a plot element, in which case, put something else in there, as long as it's something terrible enough that that a PR manager would drive herself insane trying to cover it up, that's fine. So I think, come up with your own backstory there and flesh it out. And I mean, certainly, again, when I did that with Ain't Slate and How We Roll, I worked that in even more into the characters' backstory, so they actually had some hooks into that, and it made it that bit more personal.
Gotcha. So even if like the whole pedophile employee thing may be getting into line and veil territory with some of your players, you could potentially just have the backstory of the park be that like someone played Roller Coaster Tycoon and like the cart went off of the roller coaster and crashed with people inside, and the park tried to cover that up, and that was enough to get them to close it down.
Yeah.
Holly's done that.
I mean, you could also just remove the pedophile descriptor and just have it be a child
serial killer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's super malleable, right?
And I mean, if he's going to be a serial killer, he has to be Mr. Fun, right? Yeah, exactly. Like, he can't just be a carny.
John Funland of Funland.
I was really debating if I wanted to say, like in reanimation, be like, oh, you could have a killer clown wandering. Is that Barry? Who knows? But like, I don't know. And see how it works.
Oh, someone who's just lost and has started worshiping clowns in the funhouse. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Where can I clock out? I just want to go home.
Is this overtime?
So let's go over our general experiences with this scenario. I ran it for the channel, and I played in it in Into the Darkness.
I also played it in Into the Darkness, and of course I read it, but I haven't run it.
I hope you'd read it.
I looked at the map. I played in Alex's game of it. It was a ton of fun, and am prepping to run this myself to have in a back pocket for a solid fallback one shot. It's super, super fun.
I just read it and listened to podcasts. That's my contributions. I take to those view counters up. And Scott, I think you something about wrote it.
Yeah, what's your experience with Unland?
A little bit. Yeah. I've probably run it about a dozen times as well.
Okay.
So
nice.
I think I've played around with it a fair bit, and I will say that not just because of the Daeloth aspects of it, but when I run it, it's probably a very, very different thing than what you see on the page. Just because, I mean, for a start, when I run games, I'm a very improvisational GM, so I'll just make up locations and characters and all sorts of shit on the spot, and just, whatever seems like it's going to bounce off the player characters. I'll just go wild with it.
I do have a nonsensical question for you, Scott, and it's, have you ever played in one of your own games as a player character that you wrote?
Have I? No, I don't think so. I mean, the closest is I noticed that Nathan mentioned the Apocalypse Player's actual play. Oh, while I didn't appear in that, I sort of did. And in a way that freaked me the hell out when I was listening to it. I was not expecting that. And I will say that I think it was, I can't remember whether it was Dan or Danin doing it, but whoever it was does an absolutely terrifyingly good impression of me.
Oh, that must feel a little surreal.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
I did have a question, since this does come with a map, and this is something I run into because I also like making stuff up because I feel like it. How do you deal with having a map and then you make up something that's obviously it's not going to be there initially?
Yeah, I'll just say to the players that, out of character, that the map isn't comprehensive and there's just other stuff that they may encounter.
Nice. Do not grow too accustomed to the map, for it may change.
That's been an idea for a scenario I want to do based off of As Above, So Below, that you give the players a map, and then as you're describing them going through these hallways, the map is not accurate. That they thought that they had a crutch to rely on that you just rip away from them. So I like that element for this creepy theme park too.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about what worked at the table when I was running this game for RPG Reanimators. So, I love customizing the phone calls. So I had a PC land someone wrongly in prison. So when they made the phone calls, they'd get a call from the state prison with the whole like intro. What really worked was killing a PC, and I say killing in quotations because they don't actually die. But it really shocked and jolted the players and like, oh damn, something's wrong. I used the phone calls as a good like bang/event that I could use when the pacing got a little slower, and I added the ability to turn on like the power in the amusement park via the fun house. So it gave them a reason to go into the fun house and interact with the hallway of mirrors. And then turning on the power would also reveal other areas of interest. And the lights would like cut through the fog. What didn't work? Nothing. Next question. So questions for Scott.
Well, no, well, for a start, thank you. And I was also going to say that thing about killing a PC straight off. Yes, absolutely. I do the same thing because, particularly when they encounter Barry, Barry should absolutely kill someone if the dice let him. And I really want that to happen because the reaction, as you've said, from players of going from "oh shit, I'm dead" to "oh shit, I'm not dead,"
Right?
is, it warms my dark little heart.
I feel fine.
We're half an hour in. Why am I dead? Yeah.
Oh, you heard it here first, folks. Scott likes killing PCs.
If this is the first you've heard that, I don't know what to tell you.
So I do have some questions for you about the scenario, Scott. First off, is there anything you wanted to add on to this scenario that didn't make it to the published edition? Any cut content besides the day loft?
That's the big thing. If I'd had a larger word count, yes, I would have, as I'd said before, put in more backstory and more options for the backstory. I'd have put in more information about tailoring player characters to the scenario. I'd put in more options or more locations. There are certainly locations I've improvised when running this, like a boating lake that's covered in fog that always seems to make people think of the Lake of Harley, even though it's not. Things like, oh God, I put in a petting zoo at some stage, which ended up creeping me the hell out. Yeah, undying baby goats. What more do you want? And yeah, I mean, just whatever fairground attractions you can think of, put them in there. But the main thing that I would have added if I'd had more word count would have been more options for ending it, because I'm always a bit worried about restrictive or prescriptive endings. What I want to do when I write a scenario is just provide lots of options for people to create their own endings for the game. And I mean, certainly again, when I ran this for Ain't Slayed Nobody and How We Roll, there was one character who had a very spectacular ending that was not in this at all, where he basically went on a rampage and smashed every mirror he could and ended up with like dozens and dozens and dozens of remnants inside him. And so, Ida Matthews just adopted him and treated him as a sort of a prophet, a seer.
And he was never lonely again.
Exactly. But my philosophy of designing things and running games is that it's the GM's job to come up with problems and it's the player's job to come up with solutions. And if there is a solution, a clever solution, or a way of tackling things that the players come up with, which isn't covered in this scenario, that you as the keeper think is cool, then, by all means, ask for an appropriate roll, and, maybe it's a really unlikely roll, but they should absolutely get the chance to try that and, take things in an unexpected direction.
It's great when they come up with ideas that are bad ideas too. That's like the best.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I do this?
Like smashing every mirror.
Of course you can do this.
Sure.
Oh no, I don't know. I guess if you wanna, okay.
I love that idea. Do it.
I think it's a great time to get into reanimation. So, overall, how are we highlighting the beating heart of the scenario, touching on these core themes?
I think I'd want investigators to come in with some interesting secrets to really play up that theme, right? So I'd either assign them beforehand if we're kind of, in a convention scenario situation or something where, folks aren't just going to have a lot of time. I'm going to come up with some interesting secrets that tie it all together, or just ask them to provide them to me beforehand so I have that awareness if we're asking them to come up with their own secrets. I like the idea of secrets that create some inter-party tension. Like, as always, I'm a big fan of Uncle Timothy's will and the whole thing kind of devolving into people duking it out over the secrets that they have about each other and the secrets they're keeping. So, I kind of like that the secret's creating tension in some way, instead of it just being something like ammunition for the GM, giving it as ammunition to other players to use against each other can be a fun way to bring this to the table. And, just in general, we don't see PCs often that are bad people. So I like that. I think it's a fun change to have, you guys are just terrible people with secrets and lies.
I fully agree. I think that the scenario sort of bucks the standard for a lot of these investigative horror scenarios where they are good or neutral people that are investigating some bad thing, overcome some final obstacle, and then go on with the world now knowing what they do has changed forever. Instead, there isn't really a key villain. We've already mentioned that Ina is kind of sympathetic, and instead, the scenario relies much more on player role play, dealing with these lies, this guilt that they may be living with. And so it was very refreshing for me as a player to kind of flex those muscles instead. We almost got through it just by talking, which is very refreshing. Because of that, I really think that the scenario thrives with good pre-generated characters. More than that, as Holly mentioned, having them with some kind of common thread tying them together. Alex made some very good pre-gens for his game, but I did have a couple of observations from it. So he had a real estate agent who framed a person for their misdeeds and they went to jail, and his civil engineer buddy who lied under oath to finish putting that other person away. The real estate player and I had really good interpersonal kind of conflicts to have on air. The other characters was one who was involved in a hit and run, and another who was kind of a deadbeat dad who abandoned their kid. And the player characters with more individual secrets had less of a reason to really get in the weeds in terms of this role play about should I let this go or not. And it was much easier for them to just go, oh yeah, I'm a piece of shit, and lose that part of themselves to a remnant. So having shared secrets for shitty people is going to be more effective in this. I was chatting with one of our interns, Xander, who this is one of his favorite scenarios, and he has a few things that he's made for it. One of them is a set of pre-gens he always uses that are a group of old friends that are collectively responsible for the death of a young woman and covered it up and are trying to just move on with their lives. So whenever they receive emails from this young woman inviting them to Funland, it's a very Silent Hill introduction, and they are then brought in to investigate. I think that that's another great shared secret. It kind of reminds me of Ghost Story by Peter Straub.
Oh, yeah.
Are there any other pre-gen ideas that y'all might have?
You know, I'm just a sucker for like asshole YouTubers. I don't know. That just I find that delightful. And I feel like that's a really low-hanging fruit for this scenario too. Like you don't need a ton of motivation to get them there.
The pre-gens that I used when I've run in this conventions were all people who were in the orbit of a faded media star who'd been involved in a scandal.
Oh,
And he'd basically been unlanded by his ex-wife and had lost part of himself in there. And they were all so used to covering up his secrets, and they'd all done terrible things in pursuit of trying to keep his career going, that their terrible secrets were all linked. They were all linked to each other, and that created an awful lot of sympathy for Ina Matthews because they'd all been through a very similar experience looking after this terrible media star, so that when they learned what she'd been through, they could see reflections of themselves in her.
I like that.
Yeah, that's fun to give them a positive motivation to engage in the eldritch tomfoolery as well, where there really is I could see a player going through this and wanting to do more of this at the end if they're a particularly reprehensible person who's like, I could use this to get ahead because I could do bad things and then never feel guilty about it.
I have a question actually for the group in general. I feel like if you present the creating a remnant option, if you do it in just the wrong way, your PCs aren't like, they're going to be convinced it's a trap or this is something else, or like I'm just going to be stuck here and this is all a lie, right? Does anyone have any suggestions for presenting it in a way that could be positive, could have the PCs like receptive to it? Because if they never find the idol of truth right and they refuse to make a remnant, then it's this kind of, well, how do we kind of end things here?
I think I have an idea. Like, you could show the passage of time passing by. Like, you don't know if you've been here for a week or a month or even a year, and you still haven't explored the entire park, right? You still haven't searched the Tunnel of Love. So eventually the players are probably going to get bored, and they're going to wonder, like, well, what's in the Tunnel of Love?
This is another question, not intending to segue away from Holly's question. Do people need to eat here? Like, I like the idea that in the Giddy Giggler or what have you, people are just shitting in the bumper cars as a makeshift toilet. And so, you're having to forage for those god-awful styrofoam circus peanuts or old cotton candy packages just to have something to eat. Or is it more like certain Delta Green campaigns that, like, you can eat, but the urge is not really there?
Yeah, that was more what I had in mind, that, if you are eating, it's not out of survival, it's more out of just human comfort.
So we're shitting out of human comfort.
Exactly.
Story of my life.
But there are all sorts of things you can potentially eat there, like your rats running around. I'm sure you can catch the occasional pigeon. And, of course, there's the petting zoo. And I mean, this was something that I was hoping we were going to get into in the version I ran for Ain't Slayed and How We Roll, but I think we'd swerved away from it, which is just the idea of perhaps every now and then cutting bits off these animals, eating them, and just watching them regrow.
Oh yeah, that's horrifying.
Okay, I just had an idea at all of this description. If you wanted a good way to have a mirror break at an unfortunate / very good moment. It is described that Unland sort of exists in this very Silent Hill purgatory state. And so just as someone gets closer to it, they are drawn in and then can't get back out. I think that this can also extend to animals and wildlife. So it can explain why there may be rats and things around, but also just stray birds and pigeons that you may find loads of dead birds all around the park, or they're just constantly flying, trying to get out, and they get dazzled by these mirrors that are hanging all around the property. So if players are going by, then there's these just kind of ballistic birds that are trying like hell to get out of the park and will into a mirror to cause it to break.
Oh, I like that.
Or, players can try and find a snack.
Yeah. Oh, the mention of the rats reminds me, the one thing that I throw in some of the versions I run, just as foreshadowing, is perhaps in the ticket booth or the offices, somewhere near the entrance as the player characters are going in, that they find an object that's fallen over, a heavy object of some description, that's basically cut a rat in half, or at least pinned it down to the extent where it's all but cut in half. The rat should be dead, but they can hear, squeaking in distress, and it's trying to pull itself away from whatever it's trapped under. And if they lift the heavy object off, they can see its back end is all flattened and squashed. And then it just starts crawling away into a dark corner, and then they can hear it run off after that. And it just sort of acts as that foreshadowing that, maybe this is a place where things can't die.
Delicious. Love that foreshadowing.
So with the remnants being such a big part of it, right? They're gonna break out of mirror. They're gonna grab somebody. How do you really make that initial impact big? Because it's not just a monster that like slashes you and you go, ow, I'm hurt. It like burrows into your soul and makes you lose a big chunk of sanity.
Yeah, it's the Putty Patrol from Power Rangers. Isn't that right, Nathan?
Yes. Hey, 90s kids will understand that the Putty Patrol popping up, you just know Rita Repulsa's.
They're not quite that sanity blasting. I can talk a bit about how I run remnants in the games that I run.
Sure, I'll go for it.
There wasn't, again, enough of word count for me to put in proper descriptions of how they behave and act. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I have a lot of fun with, for example, is if a mirror breaks, I'll have a remnant kind of pushing itself out of a shard that's on the ground, a shard that is too small for it really to come out of. And it'll appear, first of all, like a hand coming out and reaching onto the ground, and then another hand. And it slowly starts pulling itself out. I mean, if you've ever seen the original Hellraiser, it's kind of like Frank's rebirth in that, pulling himself out of the ground. Just this grey, pulpy mass. And that description I've found really tends to set players on edge, just for the impossibility of it.
I was wondering if you had any other notes for running this scenario. Like, we want to see the definitive version of Unland with all this like cut content restored. So just like off the top of your head, high level, what would you have?
Oh gosh,
this is your chance.
The other big thing relating to remnants that I put in when I'm running it is I'll tie the first remnant that comes out to Barry. So my little bit of backstory for it is that Barry went in there with his wife Tracy, and I mean this is definitely a lines and veils discussion, but I have the the backstory in there, unless lines and veils push it in a different direction, that he was an abusive husband, battered Tracy, and that Tracy has managed to in the course of getting rid of her own terrible memories and secrets, has also lost a part of herself in there as well that remembers Barry. Not necessarily remembers the abuse, but there's certainly a connection to him in that memory. Maybe, actually, I think what I've had in there is that her guilty secret is that she still loved this man who was so abusive towards her, and she wanted to lose that part of herself. And that memory, when it comes out, that part of her personality, when it possesses someone, then creates this really fucked up connection between that player character and Barry when they encounter them. And, all these really violent, conflicting emotions. And, when that goes off, it goes off.
I really love that idea. That's kind of getting into something that I was feeling and reading through this, that for a GM prepping to run this scenario, it would probably be really helpful to have a handful, maybe 6 or 10 pre-made people's traumas that you can maybe roll on a table or pull from if a remnant forces these memories into a PC. I'm sure it was also just to try and hit the word limits for this, but I would just be concerned about rolling a D100 on the table and be like, oh, you have a memory related to corporophilia, and having to kind of roll with that in the moment. So being able to have these traumatic memories with key hooks and things to it, you can describe to the players and then tell them to add those things to their sheet, that these are parts of them now going forward. So I love being able to incorporate Barry and the other NPCs in the environment there. Hell, maybe they get some of Ina's memories.
Yeah. Well, and also if they were lured into Unland by an NPC they know, who went there and deposited their own memories, maybe they end up with that person's remnant.
They have memories of themselves from the other person's perspective. And it's like, God, am I that much of an asshole? Were there any other changes or modifications you've done in your runs with this, Scott?
And there are bits that I've added and tailored to groups. So again, for example, at that In Slate How We Roll crossover, because Cuppy Cup's character had this old connection to the park, and because Cuppy Cup himself used to work in amusement parks at one stage and wanted to bring some of his own experiences, he was talking about how they tend to have maintenance tunnels running underneath them.
Oh, yeah.
And so he wanted to make that a key location because that's where his character had seen something terrible happen and ignored it. And what I did was riff on that and had this underground tunnel effectively turned into a different kind of shrine, where it was where all the people who had been changed by Unland, who'd left their traumas behind there, came back and left offerings, left little items, random items that were associated with the terrible things that they'd done, just as an additional way of shedding that part of themselves. And so you just had this underground tunnel that was filled up with all these burnt out candles and bits of mirror and random toys and knickknacks and items of jewelry and stuff like that. And that really creeped him out when I threw that in. I had fun with that.
That's kind of getting me to think of some of the ideas that I had for Ina more in the final showdown area in the Tunnel of Love. That if she's going to be spending all of her time just blasting her sand, pondering this icon, again, just kind of sitting in a modern art museum, that she may have the space around it kind of unhealthily positive and happy and full of love and goodness. I love what you just mentioned with all of these old toys and knickknacks and things. So maybe she has taken all of the stuffed toys from the prizes down from the park. So there's all of these moldering teddy bears and toys and things that are all around this disgusting, weird thing pulsating in the room. The core idea that I had with this, though, was just as written in the text, Ina is very sympathetic. I like that for her character, that it changes the pace of what I was expecting of the evil villain. But I wasn't a fan that, she just may beg and plead to not smash the thing that is the object of her fixation, but doesn't have much more to do beyond that. It works for having a very human antagonist, but I would rather players still have to confront or deal with her in some way. So I was thinking that maybe the Tunnel of Love has like heart-shaped mirrors and things that are going to be down its length that she has taken off of the walls and stacked around the room. So it's kind of that sickly Harley Quinn lovey-dovey space.
Ooh,
and
yeah.
if they are going to try and dismantle the Icon of Truth while she's around, she's going to be busting those mirrors and causing the place to get flooded with remnants that, it'll make things a lot harder at the ending, but also that means you should take care of her in some way or form beforehand.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Are there any other changes that we would make to this scenario?
Not a change, but I just want to touch on something Lex said there that triggered a memory with me, which is the stuffed toys. I've used those to some extent in some versions I've run. And yeah, the idea that they've been there for so long that they have gone moldy. When I've described them, the mold that's growing on them is always this sort of fuzzy grey mold that is very unpleasantly like the remnants in the way it looks. I mean, there's no actual connection, but there's enough of a visual one that it's going to creep people out.
Oh yeah, you could give them a fake out, like there may be some of these fuzzy moldering toys hanging from the old displays of like the where you would squirt the gun to fill up the balloon or something, and so they may think that it's a remnant kind of clinging from the rafters of the ceiling, and then just by seeing that blurry almost appearance of that fuzzy gray mold. I also really liked the imagery that you input with the clown decor and the carousel creatures having their eyes scratched out. And you touched on some of the inspirations from kind of the core story for it. But in terms of more ways to try and bring that in a little more in the story, I was thinking a little bit of like Event Horizon, and maybe Barry realized that the mirrors were a threat whenever he was looking at them, and that these remnants and like doing things more with their eyes. So he took that nice sharpened pole that he's carrying around and gouged his own eyes out. It's not enough to kill him, or maybe he keeps doing it in order to protect himself. So that, the mirrors are no longer a threat, but he also cannot leave. Just after maybe doing that enough times, that's why he's really stuck here and just not very pleasant.
Yeah, because he's going to have to keep pulling his eyes out. He's going to have to do that like once every hour or two. There's a bit in, again, the actual play that I ran with Ain Slade and How We Roll, which is a bit similar to that, where, again, Cuppy Cup's character had tried to crawl out through the struts and had ended up confronting Daeloth in his rawest form, and had to do that D10, D100 sand roll that you get as a result of that, and had lost something like 70 points of sand when he had 30. So he was permanently insane. But rather than writing him out of the game, I just sort of said, right, okay, carry on playing it, but you are now perhaps completely entranced with Daeloth. You, like Aina, are now there to bring his glory to the world. And he decided that he wanted to become this sort of co-priest of Daeloth. And instead of cutting his eyes out, what he decided was that he wanted to show himself truly to the world. And so what he did was he took a sharpened bit of mirror and systematically cut all his skin off so that people could see who he was underneath the skin.
Like you do.
And because it kept growing back, for the rest of the game, he was just going around just systematically cutting more and more of his skin off and leaving dead skin behind him everywhere he went.
And the other PCs don't have to worry about what to eat now. He's just constantly
Oh my God.
making pork rinds.
Yeah.
There's probably still some oil around. Yeah, fry that up.
Just use Barry's trash can. There you go.
Yeah, the idea of the pulling out the eyes of Barry, if you start him near those cups or the gigglers, is just him like throwing an eyeball or two one at a time into the cup.
Oh, or maybe he's throwing them in the flaming barrel, so you just hear like this crackling and popping occasionally as he throws them in.
Or there's like an old booth from some prize task where they're just dangling from hooks from the ceiling by the optic nerve. There's just this whole row of eyes just swinging backwards and forwards like some squishy Newton's cradle.
Where they went to visit the Vasquez ranch house.
Man, these amusement park games suck.
The prizes are just not worth it.
And I think that there are a couple of other ways that you can bring that eye horror into this too. To talk about like another key staple is maybe with the remnants, whenever they invade a victim's mind, they do it through the eyes. So like they just rear back with this blurry fist and just run in. So you watch them pour into someone's head in a fairly uncomfortable fashion. So that maybe if they invade someone's memories, this person now has heterochromia, possibly, that like their eye colors may be different to match the person that put into it. And on the flip side of that, if someone releases a part of themselves to create a remnant, maybe we watch something pour out of their eyes into the mirror, or they press their face, their eyeballs to the mirror. And then whenever they pull back from it, the color of their irises are drained. So Ina could have this really almost ghostly appearance where she has no color in her iris and her eyes are just white with pupil. But if someone gives just one remnant away, it's just kind of bleached.
Oh, I like that.
It'd be interesting to use the to do something with the idol near the end too, of because seeing it is such a problem. Like I think we can all agree that looking at the idol is the problem.
Yeah.
If you can have an investigator that chops up their eyes because they know it'll grow back, maybe there's some way that they can interact with the idol. Like maybe that helps. I don't know.
Oh, that's horrifying.
On that note, so Scott, I know that you were saying that this idol bit came in sort of very last minute, and did you say it was even just the editor that added that in, not yourself entirely?
Well, yes and no. In the original draft, it is the icon of Daeloth, which is that thing from the Ramsey Campbell story.
Okay.
But yeah, Cotton changed it to this very similar thing, but related to the Phantom of Truth.
So I'm just curious because I was having a bit of a hard time envisioning it based on just the description in the text. Alex described it as this kind of weird heart-shaped thing that was made of kind of like bits of construction and whatnot. So it was both organic and inorganic. I just kind of wanted to pose a question for the broader group is what you would envision this idol looking like to describe to the players, especially as it may be growing and invading their own minds.
I would say counterpoint, not meant for mortal eyes. So that's why you can't comprehend it.
I just find that is a little bit of a cop-out. Like, it's so unfathomable to describe. It is code for, I don't really know what I'm talking about here. So at least having like a few key details to be like, it's dripping. Okay, all right, I can work with that. But then saying it's incomprehensible is...
Oh, you could have it just like mess with your senses. Like instead of seeing it, it's like you can also see the sound coming out of it, or you can taste it.
Get a little
through its sight.
synesthesia.
Yeah.
I kind of like something that's just at its core something from this theme park, like a clown mask or a teddy bear or something like that, and like morphed and things.
A teddy bear
like,
is very symbolic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I like I like that idea, Mr. Fun, but maybe with like the gray goo oozing in or out or something.
John Funland.
Yeah.
And certainly, if you're going for the Daeloth version, though, it is fundamentally meant to be like a microcosm of what you're seeing in the struts underneath the roller coaster. Just a small version of that. And when I describe it in games normally, I go beyond the visual description because someone's got to touch it at some stage.
They're going to lick it.
And so there's a tactile element to it that it looks almost like plastic, but it's warm. It's slightly giving when you touch it. There's a fleshy aspect to it. And the way the struts merge together and doesn't quite work. You can't quite see how they all fit together. It's like looking at a three-dimensional version of an Escher drawing. And there are, the eyes, if you look closely enough, moving within there. And so, it's just those elements coming together that I think create something quite creepy.
Yeah, there was... I've referenced the White Vault already, but there's a descriptor in there that I have pulled for a lot of games that I've run that whenever character may be looking at something, it is blurry to them when nothing else is. And it describes it as almost as if their eyes are refusing to focus on what the object is. That that can get into incomprehensibleness, but then you can bring in weird details, and it's just like your brain is objecting to trying to think about it.
Yeah, the scale change of it too, though, is very appealing. From a like, you look at it and it seems decent sized, but the more you look, the bigger it gets, and just that idea of, is it getting bigger? Is it not? Like, is it perception? Are you just going into it? It's very fractal feeling in that way.
One other change I made, I actually made from Michael of MGR RPG on his blog. He had a great suggestion where at once this idol is destroyed, right, to have a more climactic ending was to have all the remnants be released at once, and the players just have to hightail it out of there.
Yeah, I like that.
I really like that. It was a very explosive, pun not intended, fun ending. And it was one of my favorite moments in the game, as Alex's catchphrase for Barry is, "You're fucked!" And he would just yell it at us again and again. I fucking hated him. Like, my character was weak, so like I at least busted him over the head with a cinder block, got a little validation there. But then in the finale of the game, as we are all basically like running with the bulls of repressed memories trying to get out of this park, you know, we're helping the last PC to not get swarmed. And as we were making our way out of the gate, I wanted to interject that I look over and I saw these remnants swarming all over Barry, and I screamed, "You're fucked!" at him as I ran out the gate. It was extremely satisfying.
So in terms of the park as well, one of the things I could see is adjusting it to your local thing. So surprise to no one, based on how I talk, I'm in the Midwest. We have like deep fried cheese curds and corn mazes and that. Have you seen people adjusting the park to be more local? Because that seems like a fun sort of way to bring players in.
I haven't, but I'd really like to. I think people should absolutely do so. There is nothing about this that ties it to any one location. And so customizing it, localizing it, I think is going to bring it to life for your players in a way that, you know, setting it outside Macclesfield isn't if they don't know the UK. And so, I agree. Yeah, they people should, but I don't think I've seen any posts or anything like that where people have done that.
I like the idea of setting it in my home state and having just a swamp slowly kind of taking over this whole park.
Oh,
Out for the Gators.
I was just thinking of the the Tex from the Texas State Fair is just constantly looming in the background in the mist. It's already terrifying.
Yeah, the Texas, for anyone who doesn't know, the Texas State Fair has a giant cowboy who's just like waving at you.
Oh,
the worst. It's awful.
Oh, I just looked this thing up. It's gruesome.
Yeah, and people wonder why I don't like going to state fairs since I was dragged there as a kid.
There's
That
something
could be your
wrong with his
Mr.
head.
Fun. Welcome to X's Park.
So a few elements that I really liked as a player for this was having that little bit of meta knowledge that, oh, I'm absolutely wandering right into Silent Hill from the beginning of this. Like, there's bad vibes from the drive up, bad vibes from the parking lot. There's a clown head on the ground. We're like, well, I guess we're going to go inside and see. And but still being able to play that out as a character being suddenly cut off from the world.
I mean, the exit's right there.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Everyone is still going to have their smartphones with them, especially if you're setting it in a modern era. And I had a couple of thoughts for things that I would want to implement whenever I run it. I have mentioned this a few times on the podcast, and Alex, Holly, and Nathan are rolling their eyes, but I love how the Alien RPG system tracks battery life, where any device that you are using for a while will have a number next to it. So in this case, if it says, if your phone has 4, you would need 4d6. And when the GM would prompt, you would roll those d6, and any 6s that come up are reduced from that pile as the battery life is dwindling. So I really like the prospect of needing to conserve your phone battery life from using a flashlight or something like that, by asking your players at baseline to have 4d6 handy, then ask them to roll those to show, oh, your phone is now at 50% battery. Your phone is at 25% battery. As they're rolling that last d6, it helps to build up tension a lot. We've mentioned before how calling is great to loop that back around to the subject of their guilt is on the other end of the line to reinforce that, because it felt very like a penance and like purgatory. However, I did find that we connected to the internet pretty conveniently, and that's a little hard to try and work with. So I think I would be tempted to, we have one bar on our phone, not enough to really get much in the way of data signal, but we can get calls out to then fuck us over that way. But for the players to be able to find information about the park, I think everyone is going to spend at least some time in the office, because that can give you the map, but maybe you can place the clues to allow the players to better piece together the park's history by having the formal newspapers as like these waterlogged, damaged newspapers about the park's closing, about the employees' arrest, and so on. But they're getting all of the public statements, and you're seeing Ina's name again and again and again.
Yeah.
Then
You can find this stuff in her office even.
exactly.
Yep.
And in this front office, that's not where she is at. Like, management is maybe in the back of the Mr. Fun's house or something to give players a reason to go inside. So they would see that there is like an employee map and listing, and yeah, Ina's office is somewhere else in the park, maybe in the Tunnel of Love, maybe in the Fun House, to give them a reason to go inside. And then from inside there, they would see the actual documents, the failed employment screenings, the complaints from parents or others that this apparently had been going on for a while. And for one reason or another, that like the park had looked the other way or was negligent and didn't know. Ina's already forsaken all these memories, so she can't tell you, but enough that the players can in universe discover the reason for this controversy and why she is so broken and did this to begin with. I find could be a little bit better connecting the dots than just pulling it up online to find an info dump. It would take just more kind of prepping ahead of time, and I'm not sure exactly how to do that, though.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. With the phone batteries, one thing I've done when I've been running this is just put that down to luck rolls. If you don't want to bring in a whole new mechanic, at any key moment where the player characters are heading into, or particularly one character on their own is heading into, say, the Hall of Mirrors or somewhere that's dark, that's not going to get a lot of light, is just have a luck roll just to see whether that's the moment their phone battery runs out.
Yep, 100% agree.
So, do you think there's a space? We've talked a lot about people that get rid of their remnants and then they leave, they come back. Do you think there's space to have someone trying to find a remnant? Like they end up going out and regretting the loss. Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah. Particularly if they've got a result that means that they can't really remember entirely what happened.
yeah.
They're left with this horrible feeling that they've left something important back in the park, and maybe they go back in there, piece it together, end up getting that remnant, or worse, someone else's remnant stuck in their head, and now they're going to try to get that out, and they'll learn the hard way that you can't get that out the same way, and just get into the spiral of psychic self-destruction.
I'm a Swiss cheese man.
That could be an interesting alternative to bring the PCs into this scenario, as each of them are feeling this like a piece is missing, and they don't remember ever going to this park, but they saw it in the paper or just for some reason or another, and think that like there's something I forgot something there as a child maybe, and so then that's whenever they go in and maybe can try and actually reclaim their remnants. Maybe they've done bad shit in the meantime, so they could give up more of themselves and then find out. Maybe Ina could say, "Oh, you're back," as a big what moment.
She greets them by name.
Yeah. And then they can come back and go get their remnant and be like, "Oh God, I remembered why I came here.
Now I don't want it
do it
anymore."
again. Do it again.
They're just stuck.
I immediately regret this decision.
Yeah, they'd be stuck anyway if they don't have.
Same time
if they
next
give
week,
their
Ina?
remnant up.
All right.
Yeah.
Um, I would love to talk about handouts and props that we could use for this scenario.
Boy, I'd love to have a fog machine. Like the Silent Hill of it all, of just having this this mist or something. Maybe you time it right with the weather. Just playing this in the mist. That'd be cool.
I mentioned
Oh.
before that this is among Xander's favorite scenarios, and he actually went through creating a new player map to hand out that looks like it has creases and things. Scott, I'm actually going to send this to
Oh,
you on
wow.
Discord. I think it's really great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can post this in the show notes for folks to use, as Xander generously gave their permission for others to use this. I think it's a great map. I'm also going to Photoshop it a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit to look more decayed and waterlogged so you can maintain more Silent Hill vibes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, he provided this and the emails that you can use for player pre-gens if you want. So big shout out to him there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Please do let him know that I really like this.
Nice. Another not quite handout that I would recommend is keep a little mood music going. You know, we've already been mentioning the Silent Hill 2 vibes. There's one track that has like the metal creaking bit, would be awesome to play whenever you're describing the roller coaster or players are having to walk under it at some point. I will also give a shout out to Zero Futurism, all one word, who is a really good kind of dark ambient artist. If you search Silent Hill ambience, you're going to find his stuff on there too. They can be very good to have on in the background for some non-invasive, eerie background music.
Yeah, and along those lines, one that I've used, not for this, but for a number of similar scenarios that I've run, which I think would absolutely suit the vibe of Unland, is there's an old British band called Coil, an industrial band from the 80s, who did the original soundtrack to Hellraiser, which wasn't used, but you can still find it on Spotify and other places as Hellraiser themes. And yeah, that I think would be absolutely perfect.
Excellent. Yeah, and if you have a second music source that kind of like Alex said, maybe if once they turn on the power or they get deep enough, just start playing like a looping theme park music underneath it, just very faint would be fun.
Distort that shit. Make
Oh
it.
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, moving on. So, I know we talked about reanimating this scenario, just basically morphing it into what we want to see. So let's talk about the scenes and events that we want to emphasize and really drive home.
I think it'll be helpful. So, Scott, you said that you tend to be more improvisational as a GM and kind of just work with whatever ideas go to you there. I do not trust myself to ever do that and like to try and prepare at least some box text to draw from in certain key moments. I think it's really likely that at least one PC is going to attempt to relinquish their guilt and create a remnant. So it could be handy to have some box text of good, weird, evocative descriptions ready to go so that you can make sure at least that first scene of that is really memorable for the players. And it may be something that I'm glad he did it because now I'm certainly not, but everyone at the table can get that experience.
He's weird now.
That was weird. He's smiling too much. Nah, I'm good.
Yeah, and one twist that I throw in sometimes, I can't remember whether it's in the scenario or not, is after they put the remnant in the mirror, just doing a brief point of view thing from the remnant's point of view. This fragment of themselves that's now
I just got
trapped within the
goosebumps.
mirror, looking out at the
Ugh.
person they used to be.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Ooh. I would definitely try and have an NPC kill a player. Or cause some kind of death.
That's your advice for every scenario.
You can never go wrong with killing PCs.
That's true.
Give the remnants guns. Oh.
Give them guns.
That's funny. I
This
didn't
is how
remember.
you know we've said it in America.
Guns that shoot bullets of pure truth.
That's right. You know, we might as well change this to Pulp Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Guns don't kill people. Bullets of truth kill people.
Guys, do you remember my my history with that flamethrower I had?
Yeah, where's that ancestral flamethrower heirloom?
Can't remember.
I'll say that Alex had a really great scene. I'm curious if you had prepped this or if it was just spontaneous, where one of the PCs went into the unfun house and was in the House of Mirrors whenever the remnant started kind of crawling out of the proverbial woodwork. And the PC obviously panicked and was trying to run away, but it made for a great moment in the House of Mirrors where he would keep bumping into the mirrors and lost his way. So whenever you're scared shitless and sprinting, oh, it's real easy to run headlong into a mirror that's pointing to the way out. Shatter it.
That's improv. That's
that was very good improv. I think it was a great scene to try and work in.
Yeah, especially in the dark.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of similarly, since the scenario as written is kind of only going to end in one of a handful of ways, it could be really helpful to try and consider some finale scenes and epilogues for sort of different versions. If everyone lets go of pieces of themselves and then gets to leave, I would want to try to work in some kind of satisfactory spine tingler ending. Then, okay, y'all, well, thanks for playing. Versus like if they destroy it and so on there. Scott, I've noticed that you are really good at leading players to contribute to their own epilogues in the games that I've heard you run, from How We Roll and Ain't Slayed Nobody. And I'm really curious if you have any tricks or advice that you recommend for folks to try and lead players to come up with good epilogues.
Not really. No, it's something.
Sheer talent. That's the tip.
Well, no, it's not. It's not my talent. It's everyone else. It's something that I got into the habit of doing with running convention games that, very much bled over into running actual plays, which is I always like having coders at the end for any survivors who will, then describe how things wrap up for their characters. Mm-hmm. And so I really like bringing that aspect into any actual play that I run. If there has been this big cataclysmic ending, then I want the players to tell me what that means for their characters, not on an emotional level, what it means for the characters going forwards. If they leave Unland, what does it mean? If they decide that they're going to stay in Unland and avoid giving up part of themselves, or if they're trapped because of a remnant, then what their new life for them in Unland means. So I've always found that trusting the players to come up with something cool means that they'll come up with a better ending for their character than I ever would.
Mm-hmm. I feel like in these episodes I've observed you tend to sort of describe an ending to the PC. So say you got grabbed by one of the hounds of Tyndalos and are floating through this space between time. And then you kind of leave them there, then shift focus to someone else and go through their kind of climactic scene, boom, 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 all in a line. Because I think that you then give that subject player room to chew on what that means for their character and what may happen to them later, so that whenever you then come back for these codas, as you call it, then like the player may be ready with their own epilogue to prepare then. So maybe it's a case of saying, here's the big finale. All right. And then what do? That it may put players a little too much on the spot. And so giving them a little time to chew on it can lead to that a bit more later.
Yeah.
That's a good technique. Yeah. But I want to move on to the next question, where we have these ideas now, but do you think it'd be a good idea to expand the scenario or stitch it into a campaign?
Ooh, maybe. I always intended this to be a one-shot. I always intended it to be the kind of scenario that has characters tailored to it. But that said, that doesn't mean that the characters who've been through it, who've survived with their sanity intact, who are able to leave Unland and have gone out into the world changed by their experiences, that doesn't mean that you can't revisit those characters in another scenario later on. I know certainly when we were doing that with How We Roll and Main Slade, there was always the idea to bring back the two characters who escaped and use them in something else. I mean, we were originally, I think, going to run Hell in Texas with them, but we've decided to do that with a different group of characters. But you know, if they've been changed in certain fundamental ways, like I think both of them ended up not being able to lie afterwards, or at least if they did lie, it would mean a massive sanity loss. So having characters like that out there in the world as Call of Cthulhu investigators and trying to navigate some typical Call of Cthulhu scenario and not being able to lie without potentially going insane, I think creates a fantastic dynamics, and I'd really like to see that.
Actually, as we were kind of talking about this scenario, I was thinking on it, and I could see this being a bit of a conclusion to not necessarily a campaign, but a series of stitched one shots of a Delta Green cell. This kind of being their final place before you kind of, okay, this is where we're gonna put this particular cell to rest. You have people that have all these baked in secrets already. You could have them lured in, getting this directive from somebody, but in the end you realize like that person wasn't, or that person is here too or something. I see Lex, you're like delighted now. You got an idea on that?
Yes, because what a way to start an investigation if someone has dumped all of their memories related to Delta Green in the mirrors of this park. And so then their handler, someone reaches out to them and they have no memories. They're going to think it's some kind of sabotage, mind wiping or something like that, and realizing, no, this guy just could not live with it anymore and wanted to let this go.
Just went to Unland.
That would be fun.
Or worse, if the handler actually speaks to the character, finds out the truth, what the character did, and is just worried that those compromising memories are there where someone else might be exposed to them, and sends a cell in there to destroy Unland.
Oh man, you could have the remnant that was created with all Delta Green secrets go into someone random. While they're in Unland.
I love that. That would be a great detail. If like you have 10 events, that's the 10, baby. Like all of this Delta Green information now forced in your head. Another one could be if they have gotten so sick of the organization, the Ina character could be a Delta Green agent who is offering this as a more benevolent retirement. And they really see it as doing something helpful, saying like, hey, I know how badly this hurts. You don't have to hurt anymore. But yeah, I love the idea that the remnants now know too much, that maybe they know how to get out or something else.
I kind of like that. And I like the home scene afterward, right? You have someone that divulges themselves of all of their Delta Green memories, and then they go home and it's like they don't have memories of like the last 10 years, not really, of their life. And they're like walking into this home that maybe has some Delta Green items or something like that, and it's like, what the fuck is all of this? And like you've been burning bridges left and right with the people in your life, and now like your wife is like, you're divorced, your kids hate you.
Why does my wife hate me?
I'm reminded of the guy in What We Do in the Shadows with the brain scramblies. Comes home, oh my god, is this my beautiful wife? And they've just forgotten everything else.
Oh god.
I would say a idea to expand the scenario is to run it with a different system. So like cult would be perfect for something like this. Those heavy topics of guilt and redemption.
I know a number of people have done that.
Right.
My friend Sue Savage runs it as a convention game with cult. And Seth Skorkowski was influenced by her conversion there and actually did a video about how to run it using cult.
Nice.
It was not an idea that had ever occurred to me, but I really like it.
I would just keep it as a one shot though.
Same. I think the scenario really excels with some good pre-made characters, and it's a very refreshing, fun role-playing experience to keep as that kind of one shot for this story.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If you want to basically a pre-made group of what'd you call them, Holly? YouTube something.
Dirtbags, yeah.
Check out the viral scenario. It's got a bunch of pre-gens that are perfect for dirtbag scenario.
The Spectral Crew, yes.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
All right, well, I'd like to move on to just general GM advice. So, personally, having run this, if running this as a one-shot, you don't got much time, so get them to the park right away. Because allowing them to do, like, research in the office, that's just going to sink pacing. And I would use events to signal places to explore, like having a light flicker off, on and off in one of the buildings, or having a phone call, hearing people walk around, seeing that movement. Also, if your players are maybe dilly-dallying a little too long, you could up the pace by taxing POW and sanity, because nothing motivates PCs more than like having a figurative bomb strapped to their chest. Like, that's gonna go down. You're gonna run out of time. So that always spurs action.
I think in more ways to subvert expectations of reliable technology. This is something that we talked about at our last Chaosium Con panel. It could be good if players are not using their phones to call out, or maybe they did. And it's in the middle of otherwise a kind of quiet, safe moment. Their phone can ring with like that da 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 ringtone that is not theirs from an unknown number. And if they hang up, it keeps ringing. It keeps calling back and have some kind of weird event there.
Now that's my nightmare. A persistent caller.
Yeah.
We've been trying to reach you about your cause.
Why block?
Yeah, I block it, and then it's just a different number. No.
What a nightmare.
I did want to ask, since we have you here, got a lot of your scenarios have big set pieces or a very visually striking element. I'm particularly thinking Bleak Prospect for this. There's some very striking, gnarly imagery there. Do you start with that? Do you just naturally start twisting things as you go? How do you approach that?
My approach to scenario development informs that, and it does largely come down to improvisation. So the way I develop a scenario is generally, and this isn't always, but it's most of them, is I'll start out with the kernel of an idea. There's usually an opening scene and maybe some idea on how to escalate things. And then I'll run it with a group of players I know who, I think will do interesting things with it. And then I'll just improvise around it. As they go off and explore places and find NPCs to talk to, then I'll create those on the spot. And the ones that strike me as being interesting then end up in the scenario at the end. And all these set pieces, all these nasty things that happen, all the grotesque stuff, most of it is stuff that when I was running this for the first, second, or third time hadn't occurred to me. And the first time I was hearing it was when it came out of my mouth. And then I just thought, oh yeah, that works. Let's put this in the scenario. And so, it is. For me, it comes down to being able to see the reaction of the players. If I'm describing something and I can see them recoil or shudder or something like that, then that's the stuff that's going in there.
I feel like the sicko yes meme internally. Every time I see that, I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to dig in now.
Oh, give me more.
Yeah. How many times do you usually end up playtesting then? It sounds it's kind of iterative.
It depends on the scenario and how quickly it all comes together. And sometimes, I think Unland, I only ended up running like 3 or 4 times. But actually with Unland, I had a head start because I'd used it as a location in other games before that. And so I kind of had it in my head. It became something very different when I developed it for Fear Sharp Little Needles, but it was a location I'd used in a few games before. But other ones that require a lot more development, something like Bleak Prospect, I must have play tested like 10 times before I wrote that up.
Now, Scott, do you have any favorite stories from any of your runs of Unland?
Oh, gosh. I think I've included most of them in the discussion we've had so far.
Mhm.
No, nothing else springs to mind beyond that. It's yeah, I mean, it runs wildly differently every time I run it,
Okay.
and my favorite stories are always those those times where player characters die violently and realize they're not dead. Yeah, I mean, that whole thing with Barry jamming a broken strut through someone's neck. Yeah, I've done that as well, and that plays out beautifully. The moments where the remnants start coming out of the mirrors, and then it's generally just seeing what decisions the players make with this terrible fucked up situation they find themselves in.
Right.
And my favorite run throughs are generally those where the player characters perversely sort of come around to Ina Matthews's side, and it's sort of, oh yeah, we can see where you're coming from, and maybe this is going to do us some good. Yeah, let's go ahead with this. And it's that feeling of buyer's remorse afterwards with, oh no, what has this just cost me? Oh God.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite stories is in the Into the Darkness game for Unland. The game ended in a TPK outside of the park because people decided to mess around with cars, and we got into one big car crash. 4 PCs. Holly was in that one too.
Yep, I remember that.
Everyone was just arguing about, oh, what was the right thing to do?
We made it.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
Stupid.
Oh, we can die out here.
Exactly.
So, Scott, I did have a question for you. As you've mentioned that you are much more comfortable with these spontaneous descriptions and improvising a lot more off the cuff. It's no secret that you are an exceptional GM. And as someone who can feel very intimidated with relying more on off the cuff inspiration or things while running, do you have any advice for GMs to try and help deliver these memorable moments and this great GMing while operating more off the cuff via improvisation?
Yeah. The big one I'd say is trust yourself. You'll surprise yourself. I think I probably had the same experience as every other GM, where when I started out running games, I was nervous about it, and I was nervous about getting stuff wrong and try to remember everything and thinking, oh yeah, if I make stuff up and it doesn't fit in, it's not going to work and the game's going to crash and burn. And the things that helped with that were, realizing that everyone else at the table is just there to have fun the same as you are. And if you get stuff a bit wrong, you can always back up and just sort of say, oh, hang on, that didn't quite land. Can we do things this way? And I think it's going to be a fairly dickish player who says no. So, you've always got that. And you'll surprise yourself, even if you come out with something that you think is trite and obvious or, doesn't really impress you internally. That doesn't mean it's not going to impress a player who isn't going to see it coming, because they can't see inside your head and see where that's coming from. And so, yes, if you describe something gory happening with one of those mirror shards, and you just throw in a few bits of description that reference something you've seen in a horror film, and you think, oh God, they're going to see where that's coming from, and it's really obvious. They probably won't, and they're going to be so caught up in the moment that it's going to creep them out. So yeah, fundamentally trust yourself, and I mean, improvisation is like a muscle. The more you use it, the more, the better you get with it, the stronger it gets, the more confidence you get. And after a while, it just becomes second nature.
We hope our deranged utterings are helpful in bringing this scenario to life at your table. Be sure to check out the show notes of this episode for links to get a copy of the scenario for yourself, any RPG resources we can share, actual plays of the scenario that we recommend, as well as an invite to our lab's Discord server to discuss more reanimations. We also post these episodes and resources to our Patreon that's free to follow. Or if you'd like, you can make a charitable donation to help us keep the ominously flickering lights on at the H. West Memorial Mortuary and Laboratories. Scott, do you have any final thoughts or plugs you'd like to add?
Yes, if people would like to hear more of the stuff I do, well, I've already mentioned Ain't Slayed Nobody and How We Roll, where I'm a regular cast member on both of those. I'm also a regular cast member on Grizzly Peaks Radio, another actual play podcast, which I absolutely adore. And along with Matt Sanderson, who I believe you all know, I co-host the Good Friends of Jackson Elias, which is a very long-running podcast now, where the two of us talk to a variety of guest hosts about topics related to Call of Cthulhu, weird fiction, horror films, and general horror gaming.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Scott. So until next time.
Thanks for listening to RPG Reanimators,
where your games can die
or live.
On the table.
Woohoo!
Lex, I was expecting a.
Oh, that's going in the episode now.
Oh, fantastic.
I'm Alex.
I'm Holly.
I'm Lex.
I'm Nathan. And Scott's frozen.
And I think Scott's frozen.
Oh,
no!
No, he's
Timing.
like, I'm out.
And this is when Scott says, "Psych."
He's like, these freaks, I'm getting out of here.
Oh, that's what this podcast is? Nope.
Never mind.
I'm sorry. I think I misunderstood what I just agreed to.
No, I like the idea that he agreed to it just to come on and like immediately deuces.
Committing to trolling.
That's funny.
Good for him, really. He did say he was having trouble with his internet.
That's all.
You gotta respect the game. That's all there is to it.
Gonna have to try harder if you want me to say more.